Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. So the next expansion, Renegades, has been revealed to us, and we now have our first look into the nature of the conflict that awaits us. We also got our first looks at our villains for this expansion. I'm certainly very excited by all the criminal syndicates that we're going to be either working for or working against, and the Barrent Imperium seems like a really interesting addition to the lore of the Cabal. I can even start to see how that might interact with some of the future story of the Cabal going forward. However, there is one very notable enemy that we've heard very little about, and yet they will have the biggest impact on our story. I am of course referring to the Dredgen, our analogue for the Sith of Star Wars, made manifest in Destiny. So today I wanted to talk a little bit more, in some detail, about what we know of this Dredgen, and to speculate a little bit more about the nature of the power that they might wield, their origins, and why they might be different from the other Dredgens that we've heard of in the lore thus far. So let's start with what we know. The first Dredgen appeared thanks to the machinations of the Hive, and in particular, the dark wizard Xior the Unwed, who saw her betrothed killed in battle by a titan called Razel Azir. Razel took the remains of Xior's betrothed, a massive Hive knight. The remains ended up being just a series of bones which he grafted to his hand cannon, the Rose. The combination of dark Hive magics festering in the remains of Xior's betrothed, and the human mastery of war manifested within Razel Azir's Rose, combined, creating something new, the Thorn. This is the first ever example of what is known as a weapon of sorrow. This is how the first Dredgen was made, Dredgen Yor. Now, hold your horses, because some of you might be saying, well, what about me? I thought I was a Dredgen too. After all, I earned the title in Gambit. And, well, yes, you might have earned the title, but I would ask you all to look at who gave it to you. Yup, it was the Drifter. Now, a little context about this is that the Drifter gives this to you for performing well in that arena of Gambit. He nominates you as a part of his crew for the trouble, and asks you to choose a name to go with your title. The title, of course, is always one that comes with the nominated prefix of Dredgen. Shin Malphur actually makes commentary on this particular notion. He elaborated on it in a series of letters to us, and he stated that neither the Dredgens of Gambit nor the Shadows of Yor were true Dredgens. You can actually find this in the lorebook called Letters from a Renegade. That's an important distinction too, because ultimately it means that we have to recognize that this Dredgen standing before us might be a completely unknown quantity. The Drifter likely gave you the Dredgen name so that you would be able to stand with him and potentially kill the man with the golden gun when they eventually came along to try and find him. The Dredgens of the Shadows of Yor embraced the idea that they would need to use dark power in order to save the people of Sol from the actual darkness that was soon to rise and bring about a second collapse. However, the original Dredgen, the Dredgen Yor that we know from legend, is something that is supposedly not the equal of any of them. He exceeds them. This is also important to understand because it creates these levels of Dredgens, and that's another interesting parallel between the lore of the Dredgens of Destiny and the lore of the Sith from Star Wars. Namely, the original Sith, at least in Star Wars Legends, which I know is not technically a part of the Disney canon anymore, but let me cook. Yeah, the original Sith weren't actually the Dark Force wielders with red lightsabers that we all think of. Instead, they were a red-skinned species of aliens native to the planet of Korriban. And yes, they certainly did have a connection to the dark side of the Force, but the point is this: you have different levels of Sith within Star Wars canon, just in the same way that you have different ways in which you can define a Dredgen in Destiny canon. There were the so-called True Blood Sith, those who ultimately had a great mastery of the dark side of the Force, and who also did end up using red sabers in the end. This was only after they had met with Dark Jedi. This also then leads us to the interesting idea of what a true Dredgen might be. The truest of them undoubtedly is Dredgen Yor, and yet there are those beneath him, Those such as the mockeries that we are when we take on the title from Gambit, and those who are somewhere in between the truth and the lie, the Shadows of Yore who undertook rituals and made their own thorns, embracing a certain degree of darkness, but maybe not the true depths of it that Dredgen Yor had embraced. With all that in mind, we need to acknowledge that the strength of the title of the Dredgen in Renegades is a matter of interpretation and is not truly known to us yet. If he is based in an offshoot of Shin's Shadows of Yore, we certainly have a Dredgen that is more powerful than one who is based in the title that we get from Gambit. However, there is also that third possibility. What if this is an even more quote-unquote pure blood Dredgen? And I use that term inadvisedly perhaps, simply on the basis that I don't think we understand truly what that would look like. It raises the question of whether this individual has raised themselves to the status of Dredgen thanks to forces of an even darker nature. Regardless of how closely he cleaves to the title and its dark origins, he is remarkable, simply because he is the first Dredgen to truly have a major story appearance in-game. Well, except for this guy, but I don't count him.
You were always so afraid Shin would get you. Sorry, old friend.
Behind you.
And no, I don't count him because, well, if you are going to get slapped around by a taken captain, at least make sure you're on Grandmaster difficulty. Anyway, returning to the Dredgen from Renegades, I'd hazard a guess at the idea that he is far more dangerous than anything we've seen before. If he is drawing from the title's origins and from the darker powers that originated Dredgen Yor, namely the powers of the Hive and the Darkness, then he might be tapping into something truly ancient and arcane. In fact, it might be something even older than the Hive, and I say that partly because Shin's description of the word Dredgen tells us a little bit more. You see, the word in itself means abyss when you translate it. In some interpretations, it means nothing. Dredgen Yor's full name translates to Eternal Abyss or the Eternal Abyss. But here's the thing. What does it translate from? Because the language that Dredgen Yor, the actual title of the first Dredgen, is drawn from, it's not actually human or Hive. Shin simply describes it as an ancient tongue, just forgotten arcana. The Hive's darkness and magic might have combined with the human mastery of war to form the weapons of sorrow, but the origins of the title Dredgen are still veiled in an even darker layer of mystery. If this new Dredgen is tapping into those layers of depth, we're in even more trouble. We might be about to face down with the first individual that could be described as a true Dredgen since Dredgen Yor himself. And let's remember the power of that individual. Dredgen Yor was capable of not only immense cruelty, but also of draining the light from Guardians with his weapon. That might be the power of Thorn itself, or it might be due to some other primal nature that lay within Yor's soul upon his corruption. And I think again, it needs to be nailed home once more. If there is a deeper power behind the title of Dredgen than simply Hive corruption and the weapons of sorrow, we might be about to see it for ourselves in Renegades. I realize that up until this point I've neglected to say their actual full title. As best we can tell, their name is Dredgen Bale. And before you ask, no, they have not appeared anywhere else in the lore as best I can tell. I searched Ishtar Collective, I searched everywhere, and there were no relevant entries that pertained to Dredgens. Now, it's worth noting that there are similarly named Dredgens within the Shadows of Yore, namely Dredgen Bane, but I want to make that distinction clear because they are clearly different characters. Dredgen Bane, also known as Tebben Grey, is not the same as Dredgen Bale, with an L, not an N. Regardless of what's going on there, I think it's important to remember all of that. There are none who have perhaps laid claim to the title of Dredgen in this same manner. It is a shadow that has not been manifested and invoked for years. The Shadows of Yore stopped being an active part of the story just before the arrival of the Black Fleet. Their power was passed onward to us with the wielding of Thorn and Lumina in our arsenals. With the Weapons of Sorrow and the Weapons of Hope, their legacy and the power that we knew we would need to one day use was given, and Shin and his shadows were content to dwell in the background. So, what do we actually know about Dredgen Bale? Well, not much more than rumor and speculation, to be honest. We haven't even seen their face, and the figure that is portrayed in-game with the actual moments of the small cutscene at the end of the Vidoc shows a thin, robed figure to the point where even making out gender isn't truly practical. Their frame, build, and height makes me want to say that they're masculine presenting, but until we know more, we shouldn't make any assumptions. Of course, there was always the chance that it was Janna 14, but we don't have enough to confirm that it would be them either. So again, until we know, let's not actually put anything down, and let's not assume. Thanks to the details from Renegades itself, we know that whoever this Dredgen is, Dredgen Bale, has a series of acolytes. Acolytes who will be hunting down in the process of forging our own Praxic Blade from the dungeon in Renegades. For those that didn't get the memo, by the way, the Praxic Blade is Destiny's analog to the lightsaber. It's what you see the one member of the Praxic Order fighting the Dredgen with. It's what the Dredgen himself is wielding. Speaking of which, that moment where we see the Dredgen approaching our Praxic Warlock here is only one of 2 appearances where we actually see them. Take a look at this again.
Start the engines. Take off as soon as you can.
What little we can confirm here is that the Dredgen in question has of course also been able to acquire their own Praxic Blade, one which carries the signature red color associated with the Sith of Star Wars, typically a sign of a dark side Force user in that universe, although here it might represent something different. This is a pretty radical departure from the Dredgens of the past, but it's not in such a manner that it is devoid of similarity. If we look at the Shadows of Yore in particular, we see that they're defined by the weapons that they created, the Weapons of Sorrow. As best we know, the process of creating these new Weapons of Sorrow has been conducted by both the Hive and Guardians. To do so, one must undertake a process of corruption, degradation, and rebirth, known as the Unmaking. This process is not truly one that needs to corrupt the individual completely. We know as much thanks to the presence and mission of Shin and the Shadows of Yore, with Shin in particular acknowledging that the powers of darkness that they wielded were necessary to fight against evil, and who even led a double life as both Orsa Zaya and Shin Malphur, cutting down those Dredgens from the ranks of the Shadows who went just a little bit too far. Regardless, the process of unmaking brings about a great degree of change within the individual who undertakes it that cannot be ignored. It is an acceptance of dark powers and of the wish to wield them. And when the ritual of unmaking is finished, and when the Shadows of Yore each receive their title of Dredgen, this is also the process by which their newly corrupted thorns or weapons of sorrow are created. In this sense, if we see a Dredgen before us, if this is indeed Dredgen Bale, there is a chance that they too have endured the unmaking. If that is so, then there's a rather important question that arises. Where is their weapon of sorrow? And I think the answer is a fairly obvious one. It's the red Praxic Blade. Or at very least it's likely to be the red Praxic Blade. Of course, the presence of a corrupted red Praxic Blade raises an even more disturbing question. Did one amongst the Praxic's own order betray them, and turn to the powers that they sought to destroy? There is one other bit of speculation I wanted to put forward, which is to do with the larger image of the Dredgen that's been made available to us. This is the second place in which you can see them for the Renegade marketing. First of all, I have to compliment whoever is on the art team, and whoever decided to make this the design for the Dredgen. The helmet is giving me massive Darth Revan vibes, and as a massive Knights of the Old Republic fan, I'm smitten. It's fantastic stuff. I wish the KOTOR remake wasn't in development hell and looked half as cool as this. The real thing to focus on here, though, is that the Dredgen seems to be holding a ghost in their hand. Now, this is a detail that might not actually carry much weight. After all, the Dredgen is likely to be a light bearer in the first place. However, I wonder if it doesn't go a little bit deeper. Get ready for a little wild speculation here that'll go probably nowhere, but here goes. You see, there is one figure whose connection to ghosts is a little darker than most others. His name is Syrel, or perhaps Cyril, depending on pronunciation, and his title is one that makes me wonder if there is a connection here, because his title was the Ghost Hunter. The lore on this is from Forsaken, and it hasn't been expanded on since, but essentially, Syrel was a guardian who couldn't bear to fight another battle in the name of something he couldn't understand, aka the Traveler. Deep down in his marrow, he believed, even though he'd lost the memories of his past life, that in that past life he had fought his last war, and that he should not be fighting another one. He wished for the cycle of life and death that the Guardians endured to end. He decided to work towards ending the violence that the Guardians were risen to enact. In his own mind, he was sparing the Guardians. He was letting the dead rest. This is why he became the Ghost Hunter. He killed the ghosts before they could resurrect their charges, always when they were alone. He would drag a long chain of ghosts behind him after many years of hunting, each one a representation of a guardian, freed from the conflict that was demanded of them by the Traveler. But with all of this, there was also something else at the heart of Syrel's story. He sought out the Awoken in particular, for knowledge. He had been haunted apparently by a question that he believed only they could answer. To this day, we still do not know what this question is, or how it truly defined and haunted him. If Syrel ever did find his answer, maybe it would have changed him, maybe it wouldn't. But now, seeing the Dredgen clutching a ghost in their hands so casually, ready to crush it in their palm, it makes me wonder if this isn't Syrel that we're looking at. Perhaps there was an entity far out in the darkness that eventually did answer his question. Perhaps that answer drove him down a darker path that allowed him to oppose the light of the Traveler more fervently. It would have had to have been quite the revelation to turn Syrel from his path. After all, he was sternly against the idea that he would ever want to fight in another war at all. And yet, here he is, if this is indeed truly Syrel, fighting once more against the light of the Traveler, and doing so openly, by not only embracing the title of Dredgen, but also by opposing the Praxic Order directly, who I think it's fair to say are counted amongst some of the most fervent servants of the light. I don't think it's impossible that something might have developed his perspective and turned him back to the path of war. It might also make a certain degree of sense as to how he has embraced the title of Dredgen. It's entirely possible that Syrel's existence was truly much like that of Dredgen Yor, a void, nothing, an abyss, something that required meaning, something that is now given meaning through destruction. Then again, this is all speculative. Nothing is confirmed for now, and we know nothing of who the Dredgen truly was before they accepted their title, and who they are now. All we know is that they are out there, waiting for us, and that we are going to have to hunt them down. But that's all from me for now. I hope you enjoyed. This is not going to be our last look into the Dredgen, I can guarantee you that. In fact, consider this a part 1. This will be a long series for certain because there is going to be a lot of lore talking about our Dredgen here. And whilst it's not 100% confirmed that this is Dredgen Bale, because there might be multiple Dredgens in question, I think it's fair to say that if it is Dredgen Bale, it's going to be the beginning of another long chapter within Destiny's lore, which centers around one of the coolest topics throughout all of it. I'm personally really excited to see where this goes. Anyway, if you want more Destiny lore, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. And of course, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Horodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.